Back in 2017, the internet was a very different beast. The so-called influencer and game developer relationship was still yet to be fully formed, and the idea of dropping these guys into your game as a form of instant fanbase recognition or a viral marketing campaign was entirely novel. No one really knew how it was gonna go. Who could have foreseen that internet celebrities might have complicated, shall we say, home lives and values that don't align with the company they're representing? Shock horror.
Damn! It was only a matter of time.
Anyway, what I'm talking about today is one of those creator crossovers that has stood the test of time, if not the test of ridicule, existing to this day as what's seen as a major blight on the face of our beloved Payday 2. A narrative torpedo for anyone trying to make sense of it all, with some of the strangest possible content additions to the game so late into its initial lifespan, but theoretically in aid of a good cause. More on that later. This is the story of the H3H3 character pack, and what remains one of the most reviled DLCs of all time. Starting at the beginning, this H3H3 crossover did once qualify as ludicrous enough to be an April Fool's joke for Starbreeze. Whilst the old site will now take you directly to the paid DLC, on April 1st, 2017, there was a whole update dedicated to this bit. The Ethan character pack was kind of up there in presentation value, said to include an entirely luck-based deck, which was actually quite creative in the grand scheme of Payday 2 perk decks, in addition to a number of new weapons referencing their mounting legal fees, showing an awareness of the ongoing fair use legal battle with Matt Hoss. This will become important later on. In terms of the game itself, there were some genuine additions, including 4 beanies of differing sizes and colours. Additionally, from the 1st until the 3rd, some of those ricochet effects advertised in the perk deck description were added to the base game, allowing you to do some fairly crazy things, not too dissimilar to the birthday and Christmas events that now reoccur annually in the game. If that was the end of the H3H3 association, I don't think anyone would have batted an eyelid. I can't remember the joke exactly landing, but a fun temporary modifier and a few silly masks were par for the course in 2017 Payday. Keep in mind this was shortly before the announcement that all future content for the game would release for free, and with the conclusion to the Great Secret still on the horizon. I'd say the mood around the game was excellent. The perfect storm to sneak an entire H3H3 themed DLC into the game and get away with it. At this point in time, we all know what drove its addition. Almir Listo, recently departed global brand director, was and remains, as far as I'm aware, good friends with both Ethan and Healer of H3H3 fame, and was genuinely passionate about assisting with their legal troubles. Say what you will about Almir's track record, but he's undoubtedly an incredible communicator with a likeable, almost enigmatic personality. His charisma was a driving factor for both Hotline Miami crossovers, even spearheading Jacket's addition to Payday 3 as recently as early 2025. But on the other side of the coin, that charm and strong will can also lead to things like the H3H3 pack somehow outgrowing the joke it initially was and stumbling into the actual game. Following on from a number of mutual appearances on both a Starbreeze stream and H3H3 podcast, it was announced that the internet celebrities were on their way to the game in a more permanent capacity this time. Looking back, I have no idea who this was aimed to appeal towards. The H3H3 fans at the time didn't seem to think too kindly of having Almir on the podcast, and I only ever heard protests about adding real people to the universe from Payday fans in the past. So, as you can imagine, we were all baffled upon finding out just what form this content would take. Released on November 22nd, 2017 for PC players only, for once console was spared, not bereft, of content, this was Payday 2's final paid DLC until the game was brought back into development in late 2019. However, following on from the announcement that all future content for the game would be free, in that moment of bliss before Overkill's The Walking Dead crashed out of the stratosphere, it was a little odd they were charging $5 for yet another character pack. The key here was that none of the revenue would be going to Starbreeze. You can still see the sentence at the top of the Steam page stating that all Starbreeze proceeds will go to Ethan and Healer, as announced during Starstream earlier this year. That's to say, minus the Steam cut, all earnings were intended to go to the FUPA Fund, the Fair Use Protection account H3H3 had set up to support their ongoing lawsuit and in theory cover any other legal fees for similarly prosecuted creators. This is why the DLC doesn't go on sale to this day, given it's designed as a non-profit charitable donation. Ignoring the fact that this was just pretty misguided signalling from a business perspective, already hinting at their ability and willingness to go back on the whole free future content bit, there's still a lot to try to wrap your head around when it comes to the financial logistics of this DLC. Since the FUPA fund was dissolved years ago, apparently unable to cover the client's legal fees alone, its wider purpose was never really achieved. Hell, the initial lawsuit it was set up for had publicly ended in favour of the clients months prior to this DLC launch. As much as I'm grateful they fought and won their historic case back in 2017, for the sake of genuine fair use, which is essential to so many of the most entertaining channels on the YouTube platform, the clients were themselves pretty much the entire charity this DLC supported, making purchasers feel like more of an individual donation rather than an aid of supporting something larger as was initially billed. And whilst I do everything in my power to avoid learning anything about what the current internet drama is, my understanding is that Ethan is now willing to re-enter the rigmarole of professional litigation by suing a number of reaction-style streamers. The irony isn't lost on me here. Those same creators he's now undertaking legal action against might actually qualify for use of the FUPA fund in its original format if there was actually any money left in it. As for what happens when you buy the H3H3 DLC now, I assume you're effectively buying it from Ethan and Healer. That's enough on its cost and presentation though. You're really here to gawk at the content that makes this such a notorious addition to the game, starting with the characters themselves. To be clear, Ethan does a fine job with the direction he was given in voicing himself. I suppose that's most people's greatest gripe with this character pack. Instead of having the two voice a pair of heisters, loosely based on their appearances or backgrounds, this is just actual real-world Ethan and Healer joining the Payday gang after being canonically recruited by Bane to, get this, work on the crew's PR throughout the US. I'd like to point out this means videos such as how to clean your gamer gear is canon to the Payday universe. In all seriousness, this decision to unabashedly add a couple of YouTubers to the core character roster undoubtedly cheapens the experience, and in some moments takes the edge off a truly compelling story. They even had these guys making it into the bloody sanctum at the White House, needing to add their names to a list of heisters Giancarlo Esposito had to read from.
Ela. Ethan.
I personally had a nightmare threading them into the story of Payday in a way that fit the tone of the story I was attempting to relay, so I can only imagine the Sisyphean task faced by the likes of Wordsmith when trying to cast these guys into an elaborate story he wanted people to take seriously. I have no idea if the possibility of creating standing characters was ever mooted, but bearing in mind they had a fairly tough time playing themselves as non-professional voice actors, I can only imagine the carnage if the suggestion had been to throw their voices in some way. The lines they were given to read are all over the place in tone, and many of the purely jokey lines do not land, although most of the standard callouts are fairly well performed, at least on Ethan's part. Healer was infamously persuaded to voice her own character off the cuff, all at the expense of Overkill mind you, and this, understandably, did not go quite as well, leading to probably the most inexplicable character in the entire game. Their masks and designs are solid enough, but I still feel like they totally missed the mark on the potential of melding humour and satire into a Payday heister. Jimmy is the perfect example of a character voiced earnestly with humorous lines that define his personality and particular habits. Now, Sholto Copley is an incredibly talented character actor and carries off the performance to perfection, but does provide at least somewhat of a template for that sort of less grounded action hero edition. The humour has to be baked into the personality and not just driven by quippy one-liners and inside jokes that fly over the heads of 90% of the player base, which was sadly the template they decided to follow for the two YouTubers. I'm positive those who still play Healer and Ethan do so almost entirely to be different and stand out, rather than out of any genuine love for their designs and performances. But as with any previous Payday 2 character pack, the actual characters themselves are entirely optional. Outside of them taking up real estate right in the middle of the goddamn safe house, you can happily pretend Ethan and Healer don't exist, while still interfacing with the rest of the content in the DLC pack. So how does that all hold up? Well, the weapon, the airbow, is actually quite fascinating. As the only multi-shot fed bow projectile weapon in the game, it's an authentically spammable crossbow that, at launch, actually thrusts towards the very top of the meta. At the time, we were still a little off the pace in terms of the snipers and LMGs we eventually settled with, so any high spike damage, concealable option fit the bill. With 700 damage as standard, this thing could one-shot headshot the vast majority of the special cast, and with very accessible crits, that sort of headshotting accuracy wasn't even necessary. The extra spammability offered by the crossbow, in addition to access to the utility of rapid-firing explosive rounds, placed it a cut above the already highly popular spike damage projectile weapon class. Sadly, just about everyone picked up on this. Within 8 days of launch, the airbow was totally cut down to size, as talk of pay-to-win weaponry had become a very real concern. Suffering a massive 23-point reduction in concealment, bringing it down to just 5 at base, the airbow was essentially cut off from accessing most concealment crit builds, which was standard at the time, allowing the other projectile bows to reclaim their niche. Amusingly, that's how it remains, with the concealment stat of an RPG far lower than makes any logical sense just to keep it in check. If you fully lean into a concealment build, you can still make it work, something I quite enjoyed in testing with explosive bolts, but otherwise you're much better running it in a vanilla tank build as a regular SWAT destroyer for any accurate playstyle. It's not a bad weapon at all, and quite fun for its unique qualities, but after those hasty nerfs, I don't see it as reason enough to donate to Ethan and Healer. But what of the perk deck, usually the swinging factor that makes a character pack worth investing in? You don't need to like Aussies to fall in love with Anarchist, so how does tag team stack up? Well, in my opinion, it's just a few tweaks away from being a genuinely interesting co-op focused option. It's unpopular by association, but it's genuinely not a terrible perk deck on paper. Although it's heavily outscaled by death sentence balancing, a health-orientated deck with excellent healing, teammate support, and some free damage absorption is not bad at all. Especially with how aggressive kill-focused playstyles feed into almost constant uptime on the healing effect. As was in vogue at the time, this is another throwable consuming deck, and whilst undoubtedly less potent than Stoic, Kingpin and Sicario, it holds its own, especially on lower difficulties. Check out my Medic Challenge run to see it in action. Whilst it underwhelmed players initially, in the same update that saw those nerfs to the airbow, Tag Team was buffed to extend its potential activation range and recharge rate. What it didn't address was the awkward line of sight requirement for it to function, making it clunky to use at times without proper team cohesion or a joker on hand to freely activate on. It also used to spoil teammates' berserker setups with passive healing until that was fixed in late 2022, another reason why it was viewed as an irritating, unserious deck to run. In truth, it never had the uptake it likely deserved due to the negative H3H3 association, the immense power of perk decks it was competing with in the throwable category, and slightly shoddy execution of its core mechanic didn't help either. A solid idea, doomed from the get-go. Finally, there's also the two-handed ruler, a melee weapon so inconsequential I forgot it existed, packing Shinsakuto Katana stats on the surface, the best melee in the game, until you realise it has none of the swing and reset speed that makes the katana so powerful. And that is everything included in Payday 2's most contentious edition that remains in the game to this day. A crap melee weapon and a mid perk deck and primary. The offense and frustration obviously comes from Ethan and Healer's direct addition though. Even had they nailed down Oscar-worthy performances, you can appreciate the community's skepticism, and let's be honest, in reality they dragged down the average performance quality of the crew significantly. That's without even getting into the modern day shit-slinging that is the state of creator drama. As I'm sure you're aware, Ethan and Healer's image has warped significantly over the past 8 or 9 years. At the time, they were internet darlings, and the community still wasn't sure if it was a good fit. Now, regardless of your stance on current conflicts, Healer's description, a few quotes related to her time in the military, feel uncomfortably out of place in Payday, a franchise that's at pains to stay at the centre of most socio-economic, military, and political discussions, for the most part. It's a bit of a lesson in IP protection and preservation, ironically enough, the very thing Overkill apparently wanted to support in assisting the client's legal proceedings. Inadvertently, they diluted their own product by introducing something that damages the perception of the Payday brand, and it's why I will never support these creator-driven additions outside of background references, not stretching beyond the safe house graffiti. The content itself was far from as atrocious as it's perceived, but certainly wasn't on par with the likes of paid packs such as Sydney or Scarface, and what even free characters such as Sangres or Duke offered gameplay-wise. Most crucially, it really was a sign that there was no sanctity to the Payday IP, as the degradation of the playable crew displayed a clear lack of idea moderation at the highest level. Forever the black sheep, which no one at Starbreeze dares to bring up. Thank you so much for watching. A quick reminder that my Apex Gaming PCs remain available, and there's a massive $5,000 rig giveaway you can partake in entirely for free if you're interested. Take care, don't waste your money on a meme, and I'll see you all very soon. A huge thank you to my dedicated Patreon backers. If you want to join this crew in going infamous, check out the link below and pledge as little as $2 to see your name in the credits, or get 24-hour early access to future videos and vote on upcoming content. Take care, I'll see you all soon.